Hello and welcome to the Lens at 177, and we continue our discussion related to the general elections coming up on December 14th. And today sitting down with me is Dr. Neelesh Gounder, a well-known academic in Fiji. By profession, he's a senior lecturer in economics at the University of the South Pacific. Dr. Gounder, welcome to the show. Let's begin the discussion. Obviously, we will discuss economy with you. How does a general election affect the economy of a country?
So, thank you, Anish, and thank you for the invitation. So, a general election is an important political process, and the economy of any country does not operate in isolation. It's the rules and regulations and policies actually emerge from the parliament and the government machinery. So, what happens within the political system has an implication in terms of how the economy operates, because the economy operates within a framework of rules, regulations, policies and norms. So, any election is very important for any economic system, because it's part and parcel of the political institutional arrangement, and the way elections are conducted and the outcomes of the elections will have an important implication in terms of the economy and how the economy does, because at the end of the day the implications or outcomes of the elections will then have an influence in terms of what kind of laws, rules and policies that we have.
Just give me some information on how does the economy starts to react when a writ of election is filed and the campaign starts. Is there a reactionary period where the economy slows down or maybe moves forward?
So, normally we would expect the different stakeholders within the economic system to respond to changes in political institutional arrangements or the discourse around the politics. So, one of the key stakeholders within the economy is the private sector, and private sector is basically what drives the economy, and the economic activity mostly eventuates from the private sector. So, for the private sector, the policies and the framework within which these policies are developed and the rules and regulations that emerge from the government are important in terms of how they see moving forward. So, the political process, which election is part of the political process, is very important in terms of sending specific signals to different stakeholders within the economic system. So, we do expect the different stakeholders, especially the private sector, to wait for these indicators and to decide what to do next. For instance, policies are one of those important outcomes of say if there is a change in government or change in the governance processes, because policies will have an impact in terms of what the private sector does and how does it have an influence on what the private sector is doing. So, the private sector sells goods and services, it produces goods and services, sells goods and services. Therefore, economic activity is generated within that interaction between what is produced and what is sold, what is bought, and the incomes that are generated within the process of producing goods and services. But this system of producing goods and services and selling does not happen in isolation. It's within a framework of rules, regulations and policies. So, elections and change in governments will have an important bearing on what kind of policies we have, and eventually what kind of rules, regulations, and how does the private sector also end up interacting with the government of the day. These are all part and parcel of the economic system. So, therefore, the private sector will be interested in the electoral process, in the governance structures and mechanisms and the policies that are likely to eventuate.
Do you think chief executive officers and boards of private entities have put a stop to major projects pending the outcome of the elections?
So, we haven't done any survey, but the anecdotal evidence that I have from my interaction with a few businesses, particularly large businesses, is that yes, they have, and a lot of them are not sure in terms of how they should move forward, because for them, for businesses, the profit motive plays an important role, and the profit motive is hinged to the ability to sell goods and services that or whatever business they are engaged in. So, the overall economy and the direction in which the economy is moving will have an impact on consumer spending as well as the business's ability to sell goods and services and make a profit. So, these things are all tied together, and businesses are waiting to see what eventually happens, and whether there is a peaceful transition of power, if there is a need to, and if there is a change in government. These are all important aspects of the political process, and especially during elections, if there is uncertainty around what is going to happen or what might happen, and if a particular scenario eventuates, what are the implications of those scenarios. These are some of the things that the businesses, but also the households are mindful of, and this brings this level of uncertainty into the economic system, because for businesses and households, certainty is very important, and therefore elections can provide that level of uncertainty. If a country has a well developed political institutional arrangement, then the level of uncertainty is likely to be much lower. But given the kind of political institutional arrangements we have, and what has happened in the past within the political institutional arrangements, businesses are cautious, and I think it makes sense for them to be cautious, because there's a level of uncertainty around the elections and the outcomes, etc.
The current Prime Minister and some of the ministers of the Fiji Face government have continuously said for stability they should come in, for stability they should be voted in. Despite this assurance, do you think businesses are still holding back and waiting to see what happens?
In my opinion, those comments are in itself and a cause of instability. For instance, asking someone not to vote for someone else because it will bring instability is an statement of an attempt to cause instability. So, I don't think such a discourse is going to help the private sector or businesses to bring more confidence into the economy. I think political leaders have to be more responsible now that we are very close to the election, in terms of the discourse that emerges and the kind of political rhetoric around political competition. So, the last thing we would want to see is uncertainties and any discourse that leads to reduction in business confidence or investor confidence, because the economy has started to rebound. We are on the path to recovery, and it's not only about tourism numbers, but political stability, business confidence and investor confidence are also very important in terms of economic recovery or the path towards economic recovery.
Just finally, before we close this segment, what about investors, overseas based investors? Do you think they have also held back their plans? Okay, let's wait and see what happens.
So, investors are also very mindful of political stability in any country. Any investor who wants to invest in a country would be concerned with levels of business confidence and investor confidence. So, I would assume that is likely to be the case, because what we have seen in the last 10 years, investment has actually continued to decline, and just prior to COVID, the rate of investment was around 13 to 14% of GDP, and that's a decline compared to 2013, when we had GDP levels of around 26% of GDP. So, it's almost the half of what we had compared to in 2013. This is relative to GDP. So, I think that really shows that we aren't able to attract higher levels of investment as we used to do in the past, and it could be linked to a number of factors, but one of which would be investor confidence in the economy, in the broader economy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neelesh. We'll take a short break and continue the discussion on the other side.
We were around when the deed was first signed. We were around when the first car engine roared. We were around when the very first was crowned. Through devastations, jubilant celebrations, and the milestones. We will continue to be around to bring you all the stories first.
Welcome back, and today we are talking to Dr. Neelesh Gounder, Senior Lecturer in Economics at the USP. Dr. Neelesh, let's talk about the elephant in the room. A lot of discussion around the national debt level, currently at about $10 billion. Does the normal person, the voter, understand what the national debt is, or he or she concerned about this issue and how it will affect him or her in the elections?
So, I don't think the normal voter would be too concerned about the national debt as a whole, but we do have many voters who understand economics and the concept of debt, etc., would be concerned, and rightly so, because our debt has grown over the past 10 years, and at the moment is slightly over 85% of GDP. Now, debt in itself is not a bad thing. Economies everywhere borrow to spend in infrastructure and to fund public services. Businesses do the same and households do the same. But the real issue is when your debt continues to grow, but your income is not growing faster than your debt, then eventually a scenario arises where an economy will find it difficult to meet the debt servicing requirements. So, let's take Fiji for example. Our debt is slightly over 85% of GDP, and in the 2021-2022 fiscal year, 32% of all the revenue the government collected actually went into debt servicing. So, the remainder is then available for spending in public services and infrastructure. And you can see that every dollar the government collects, 32 cents of the dollar is going to a debt servicing alone. So, the remainder of the 68 cents then is available for the government to spend. So, if the economy isn't expanding or growing, but debt servicing requirements continue to grow, then more and more revenue is going to go towards debt servicing payments, and less will be available for government to spend on public services and infrastructure. That, I think, is the real challenge. But on top of that, if there are negative shocks or if there are natural disasters, and we know that natural disasters can have a big impact on the economy, and if the economy doesn't expand during a natural disaster, and in that case the government revenue will go down. So, during those specific scenarios, the government will find it extremely difficult to fund infrastructure or spend in public services, because it also has to meet the debt servicing requirements, unless it wants to spend more to continue to make payments for infrastructure, public services, but also meet the debt servicing requirement. In that case, the debt is going to grow. So, I think the real challenge is to ensure how we keep growing the economy. And going back to your question of debt is a concern and should be a concern now for the government, and they must seriously look at how to reduce the level of debt that has grown over time. It's not only during the last 2 years. Yes, COVID exacerbated the situation, but the economy was already slowing down way back in 2019. So, the economy is already slowing down pre-COVID. COVID just exposed the fault lines and exacerbated the economic scenario that Fiji was in, and it's important for the next government to ensure that efforts and strategies are put in place to ensure that the debt does not continue to grow. Now, one of the things that's really important is to ensure that the economy is also growing relative to the debt size, and if the economy isn't growing, then the real challenge in the future will be how do we meet the debt servicing requirements compared to the revenue that we are generating, given the rates that the economy is expanding or growing.
Given what you have said, if I was to ask you, can the economy collapse because of the reasons you have given? Is that possible for Fiji?
At this point in time, not really. I don't think the economy is going to collapse because the economy is now growing. That's a positive sign. We also have recovery is in progress now, and all the economic indicators show that the economy is in progress. So the economy isn't going to collapse, but things can change during a very short period of time. The scenario that we have right now can change, say for instance, within 1 to 2 years. If we have a natural disaster, for instance, and if we have a big natural disaster, and and the natural disaster has a large impact on the economy, which means that the economy won't be growing. And if the economy is not growing, the government isn't going to collect enough revenue to pay for public services, to invest in infrastructure, but also to meet the debt servicing requirements. And then serious challenges can arise, as we saw in case of Sri Lanka. The debt had grown in a big way, but the economy wasn't growing. And because the economy wasn't growing, government revenue wasn't growing as well. And the economy wasn't growing in Sri Lanka. It wasn't only because of economic policies, but because of political institutional arrangements as well. So things can change very, very quickly, and it's important for any government or policy makers to be very mindful of the fact that the current situation can change very, very quickly. We are small island states. We have special challenges, and our vulnerabilities arise from the fact that we are endowed with special characteristics based on the fact that we are a small island state, and we have to be particularly mindful of that. And those vulnerabilities can play an important role in ensuring that the current scenarios can very quickly change. So I think policymakers in the government has to be very, very alert in terms of the debt we have. How do we manage the debt, ensuring that the economy continuously grows, so that the government is able to not only fund public services, invest in infrastructure, but also to ensure that we are able to meet the debt servicing requirements, and that economic policies are ensuring that the economy is continuously expanding, continuously growing, so that we also lift more and more people out of poverty.
What plus points do you think the Fiji First government has in terms of economy and how they have handled the economy as they go into the elections?
So I think the policy of minimum wages was a good policy that will certainly help the low income earners, but that's something we had advocated. I think although the policy came in late, but it did come. This policy could have been implemented way back in 2018 if there were cordial relations between the government, the trade unions, and the private sector. I think this was delayed a little bit, but I think one of the plus points is the minimum wages, which is definitely going to help and support the low income earners and those working in industries with low wages.
And do you think the Fiji voters look at the track record of a government, how they've handled the economy when they go and to cast their vote?
Certainly, I think voters everywhere judge government on its performance, not only in terms of the economic policies, but social policies and political side of the economy as well. How the government has managed the economy, but societal relations as well, in terms of especially in case of Fiji, for instance, we have two major ethnic communities. What has the government done to bring the two ethnic communities together, to unite the ethnic communities, to build social capital within our communities and society? So yes, governments are definitely judged, but not only on economics, but on other fronts as well, on what it has done to achieve social outcomes, what it has done within the political discourse arena, the political institutional arrangements, in terms of its relationship with other stakeholders. How is the rule of law fared? Within the rule of law, the police, the director of public prosecutions, and the judiciary, all of these are important aspects of good governance, and I'm sure there are many individuals or households who keep a tab on what's happening and how does the government manage the affairs of the country in all different spheres, not only economy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gounder. We will continue the discussion on the other side.
We were around when the deed was first signed. We were around when the first car engine roared. We were around when the very first was crowned. Through devastations, jubilant celebrations, and the milestones. We will continue to be around to bring you all the stories first.
Welcome back, and today we are in discussion with Dr. Neelesh Gounder from the University of the South Pacific. Doctor, let's talk about credibility of an election. Why is it important for a country when you relate it to the economy?
Yeah, credible elections are really important because the economy does not operate in isolation, or economic activity does not happen in isolation. Economic activity happens within a framework of rules, regulations, and norms, as well as policies. So there is a strong link between political institutional arrangements and economic outcomes. And when I say political institutional arrangements, I mean the parliament, the systems and processes and how parliament operates, the way members of parliaments are elected, and the way bureaucracy operates, the relationship between the bureaucracy and the legislature, and the relationship between the bureaucracy, legislature, and other independent arms of the government. So these are all important aspects of political institutional arrangements. And so how the political institutional arrangements work will have an important implication in terms of achieving economic and social outcomes. The systems and processes in the discourse and what happens within the political arena defines whether there is political stability or political instability, and those indicators serve important barometer for the private sector and for household in terms of household confidence, business confidence, and investor confidence. And credible elections is part and parcel of the democratic process. So credible election is very, very important because it will provide the stability that's needed for economic activity to thrive. So if elections are not credible, for instance, then it is possible that the outcomes of the election may not be taken for granted by the people. People may not respect the outcome because they don't believe in the credibility of elections. And that does not augur well for stability, that does not augur well for political confidence. And if political confidence is impacted, it will then have an impact on economic confidence. And the three different aspects of economic confidence, we usually look at investor confidence, business confidence, and consumer or household confidence. So what happens in the political arena has a strong influence in terms of what happens in achieving economic and social outcomes. Also in terms of the social capital within communities, or the social relationships that we have amongst our communities can also be impacted in terms of the credibility of the elections. So the elections are strongly hinged to what we expect to happen within the broader economy.
What do you think big brothers Australia, New Zealand, India, who have been giving budget support to Fiji, are currently looking at in terms of where Fiji is headed? What's on their checklist to see whether the country comes through the elections professionally, and then they can continue their support again?
Countries like India, Australia, and New Zealand are well known for strong democracies, and they have very strong norms and values regarding democracy. And I'm sure they are also looking for those values and norms within our electoral systems and processes. Australia and New Zealand in particular have been our good friends, but also in economic terms our important trading partners as well. Almost 60% of our tourists come from Australia and New Zealand, and Australia and New Zealand have also provided huge budget support to Fiji, especially during the last 2-3 years. So, I am sure they are looking at strong and credible election, free and fair elections. There is fair competition amongst all political parties. There is less use of restraints across different political parties in terms of the ability to compete on a level political field, and that political parties, all political parties have an equal opportunity to take their views and ideas to the people and let the people decide which political party they are willing to vote for. So, I think international partners are also are keenly looking at this election, and especially countries like Australia, New Zealand and India are strong democracies, and I am sure they are looking for those values within Fiji's political system as well.
Do you think the normal voter in a village or in a settlement is also holding on to their money, not building a house, not investing in a house, pending outcome of the election?
So, voters and households do get involved in elections, because everybody has a stake in electing their governments, and everybody should be effectively taking part. But yes, elections do bring in some level of uncertainty in terms of what might happen or what might not happen, and therefore, it is possible that households similar to businesses may hold off their plans in terms of what to do next, whether to buy their house or whether to invest in a house, or whether to invest here in Fiji or to invest elsewhere. We also have seen a number of people going abroad, migrating abroad. At USP, I am fortunate to meet some of the brightest and the talented minds that come from the region, and they do tell us that political considerations are an important issue for them in deciding whether to live here or to go abroad. So, I think individuals are concerned, and they should be concerned about the elections and the governments that come in play, and as well as the policies that are likely to emerge based on different ideologies that different political parties hold.
In any country, should there be a change in government? Should the transition of power be smooth to ensure that the economy and the voters, they all remain on the same path to understand that yes, the country is moving forward?
So, whether a government should remain or change is the prerogative of the people. I think the people of Fiji have the right to decide whether the government should remain or a new government should come in place. But yes, peaceful transition of power is very, very important. It's part of the democratic process. If we have adapted democracy as a means to govern ourselves, then we must also realize that peaceful and credible elections are an important part of that democratic process, and that if the incumbent loses, there must be a peaceful transition of power, and otherwise that once again, if there are drags in terms of transition of power, that breeds in uncertainty, will eventually lead to lack of political confidence and impacting investor and business confidence, and the economy will be further impacted. And Fiji doesn't need any more political instability or any other uncertainty that will impact economic recovery at this point in time. So, going back to your question, I think peaceful transition of power is very, very important, and it's an extremely important part of the democratic process of losing and winning. We have different political parties, they all contest, and those political parties who form the government should be allowed to form the government, and those who aren't, then join the opposition. And in the democracy, the opposition is as important as the government. So, a peaceful transition of power is an important part of the democratic process.
Do you think our current political leaders understand this concept of peaceful transition of power?
I'm sure they understand, and it's important that they understand the importance of peaceful transition of power, because otherwise that will really have an have a negative impact in terms of what we call true democracy is. If we really have true democracy, then a peaceful transition of power is an immediate part of the true democratic country that we are.
On a lighter note, if you were made Minister for Economy, what 3 things would you do within a 24-hour period to get things moving?
So, I would like to do a long list of things, but first of all, I think it's important to talk to the stakeholders and get ideas from the different stakeholders, because the government only has certain answers. The government cannot do everything on its own, and it's important for the government to start consulting, talking to the stakeholders, including civil society organizations, in terms of how do we deal with the challenges that we face today. And a finance minister is not only responsible for the economic outcomes. The finance minister and the entire government is responsible for economic, social and political outcomes as well. So, I think stakeholder consultation is very, very important. And number 2 would be take a stock of the policies, look at what policies we have had in the past, what has worked, what hasn't worked. And it is time to relook at the policies that have worked and that haven't worked. And I think moving forward, an important part of the decision making should be about how do we ensure that the economy is continuously growing and that we are able to lift more and more people out of the poverty. But within all of that, I would like to see that we include a wide variety of stakeholders, because a government cannot achieve everything on its own. We have seen in every country, the civil society organizations also play an important role. Take for instance education in schools in Fiji. 99% of the schools are owned by community or faith-based organizations. One can imagine if these organizations had not intervened early during our history and invested in schools, what would have been the situation in terms of access to schooling. I think organizing or marshalling a variety of stakeholders and to understand what are the exact challenges and working together with the stakeholders would be one of my main priorities.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neelesh Gounder. So, we are talking to Dr. Gounder from the University of the South Pacific, and that's the program for today. Join me soon when I come and discuss politics with another person on the hot seat. Thank you very much.